New York in the 1970s. A fucking shit show. The place with the mess of violence, prostitution, drug use, arson, and any other crime under the sun, mostly controlled by the mafia. White flight had left the city without money, and no one, not even the president, was there to save them. In a very famous daily news headline, it read, "Ford to city, drop dead," which I think pretty much explains it. The city was effectively decaying, which was actually perfect, but not for the reasons of standard of living or general happiness. You see, when you have a city, town, or any really living space that breeds desperate people, specifically creatively desperate people, which New York still has a lot of to this day, you tend to get great art, and specifically great music. And that's exactly what we got in New York City in 1976. But we'll get there. But first we need to talk about a few guys from Forest Hills, Queens, New York City, that somehow created one of the greatest music scenes of all time, and one of the greatest rock albums to ever be recorded. So, are you ready?
1, 2, 3, 4!
Jack is a wolf, Judy is a run. We both put down a balance on the hearts to fight. I know I don't know why. Oh, I don't know why. I tell die. Oh, yeah.
Before we get to the Ramones themselves, we need to talk about the similarities between all members of the band. They all liked two bands, the Beatles, duh, and the Stooges. Now the Beatles, again, are the band du jour of the 60s, but specifically, they like the pop Beatles. Please Please Me to Help. Anything from the early, mid-60s. That's where they got most of their influences, for their more pop-influenced sort of hooks and rhythms. Now the Stooges are interesting, because they gave the band a more hard, heavy, and loud sound, more influenced by the blues. Now, they are much more worth talking about, the Stooges, but we can't get into them right now. All you need to know is that the balancing between these two styles is hugely important in understanding the Ramones. With that out of the way, let's talk about Jeff Hyndman, or more famously, Joey Ramone. Jeff Hyndman was born May 19th, 1951 in Forest Hills, Queens, to a Jewish family. He was raised by a single mother as his parents got divorced, and while his family was fairly dysfunctional, it was never abusive. His mother would encourage her kids to get into the arts, really get into music in particular. And Joey, or I'll just be calling him Jeff for now, would have a brother named Mickey, who would go on to be another musician, Mickey Lee. Jeff was very tall, about 6'6", and a lot of health problems, both mentally and physically. He had severe OCD, which he'd have to spend the rest of his life dealing with, battling even, and it gave him a lot of stress trying to deal with it. He began having suicidal thoughts and violent tendencies, culminating in him pulling a knife on his mom, which sent Mickey into no, we're not doing this, get the fuck out. We can't have you here. So they sent Jeff to St. Vincent's Hospital, which he stayed for a month. He stayed there, and he got his OCD somewhat under control, though it would pop up then and again. He was also the weird kid at Forest Hills High School, but went on to embrace it and started wearing these prescription sunglasses that warped around his face that made him more comfortable in his own skin. That didn't, however, stop a bunch of the kids from bullying him, which didn't inspire his songwriting, particularly on Beat on the Brat.
Beat on the brat, beat on the brat, beat on the brat with a baseball bat. Oh yeah, oh.
Music-wise, he was obsessed with the production style of Phil Spector, who's a major producer for a bunch of girl groups. If you listen to any 60s girl group songs, they're probably Phil Spector. He was also a huge fan of the song The Ballad of Dwight Fry by Alice Cooper. He was a huge Alice Cooper fan, along with Lou Reed, T-Rex, and especially David Bowie. Jeff was originally a drummer. He got his first drum kit from a local supermarket by trading in stamps, but he did not have enough stamps to get a drum kit, stand, so he just played the drums on his lap. He also learned guitar from his brother, Mickey, who, in turn, learned from a guy named Tommy. We'll get to Tommy later. Now, Jeff was hugely inspired by the glam scene, and he would join a glam band called Sniper. And Sniper was short-lived, but somewhat regionally successful. He didn't really have any big recording songs, but, you know, it was a local thing. And Jeff would wear this cotton one-piece jumpsuit, all black, with the platform shoes and scars and glitter on his face. It was a thing. But he was taken out of the band when they decided he wasn't pretty enough, which was a huge issue back in the day. All the bands wanted to have that star look, especially with their lead singer. But Jeff would later go on to define a style. Now, do you remember Tommy? Sure you did, I just said him about 5 minutes ago. His full name was Tommy Erdelyi. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. He was born in Hungary to parents who had barely escaped the Holocaust by hiding out with some helpful neighbors. His family moved to America when he was around 6 or 8. He played guitar in a garage band called the Tangerine Puppets in Forest Hills with his friend Mickey and another guy named John Cummings, who played bass. John was an interesting bandmate. He was very violent, specifically to when the band started to screw up. If someone made a wrong note, he'd punch him across the face and say, "What the fuck are you doing?" You know, great band material. Love to have him around. And one time during a performance, the Forest Hills class president came to see the show, and John, for no reason at all, just drops his bass, goes over to the guy and kicks him in the balls. Just because, I don't know, it was funny. And John was born in Long Island and moved to Forest Hills as a teen and was the only son of a construction worker. He was very rules-driven. He liked structure. He even went to military school. But he also didn't like to be bossed around. He liked to control his own life. He rebelled a lot and was a juvenile delinquent by all accounts. He got into fights, sniffed glue, and occasionally dabbled in heroin, which you don't occasionally dabble in heroin. Either are like no heroin or junkie, and there's a very short transition period. Thankfully, the mom put a kibosh on the whole thing and flushed all his heroin down the toilet, which I'm sure he was very sad about. He also saw the Beatles at Shea Stadium, one of the most famous concerts of all time. But despite loving the band, he brought a bunch of rocks to throw at the Beatles, but he realized he was too far away from the Beatles, so he kind of just stayed there and hung out with his friends. I don't know, it's John Cummings. How am I supposed to manage this? He turned his life around somewhat and got a construction job from his dad's company. I don't know if it was just his dad's company or just where his dad worked, but anyway, he got a construction job and never missed a day. He came from a very working class background, which influenced him musically. See, he saw his guitar as a tool, something you don't go home and practice with. You only use it on stage, like you would a hammer. He was a huge fan of Elvis Presley, no doubt, but he said he had, quote unquote, no influences. That's some bullshit. His real influences were Bo Diddley, Jimi Hendrix, Eric Clapton from Cream, and especially Dick Dale, who was known as the king of the surf guitar. In fact, on January 23rd, 1974, John bought his very own guitar, a blue Mosrite, which is actually a surf guitar used by bands like The Ventures. Now, there are two reasons he bought it. One, it was cheap. It's only $50. He actually haggled the price down to $50. And two, he said that all guitars basically sounded the same once you turned them up all the way, which is right, but wrong. John Cummings is a very interesting man. Smart is not one of them. Let's just put it that way. On this trip, he was actually with his friend Douglas Colvin, who also bought a guitar at that time. Now, Douglas Colvin will literally be known as Dee Ramone. Now, Douglas and Johnny became friends through the Stooges. See, John was delivering laundry, and Douglas kind of just passed him by, and they just kind of met each other and then started talking about the Stooges. Friends are born. Now, Douglas had probably the saddest childhood of all the Ramones. He was born with two angry alcoholic parents who would regularly abuse him, and he moved around a lot from the United States, Japan, but mainly he stayed in Germany. Now, as a kid, he would go around the bombed out buildings of post-World War II Germany, and he would find Nazi paraphernalia and sell it. And that's where he got fascinated with Nazism itself, which we'll explore much later. Just as a quick little piece. It's pretty bad, but it's not as bad as you think it is. Douglas also experimented with Leonardo da Vinci style wings. Because yes, this is what children in the 60s did. But he was going to test them out, but thank God someone, a responsible adult in this story, decided that no, the child should not be jumping off of high buildings with paper wings, so they stopped him. Douglas also started experimenting with drugs at a very young age. By 8, he was sniffing glue, which he always tries to deny, which is a little funny, even though he wrote an entire song about it. But anyway, he also started taking morphine out of garbage cans at around 14, and he also started to take heroin. In fact, when he lived in New York, he would take the F train up to Manhattan to buy heroin and also to sell his body, to put it in a nicer term. This was actually inspired a song named 53rd and 3rd Street, which is about, it's a long story. Basically, a Vietnam vet kills one of his clients to prove that he's a man. It's weird. The Ramones had some interesting songs. Now, musically, Douglas was inspired by this Scottish rock band called the Bay City Rollers, and their song Saturday would actually go on to inspire the Ramones' biggest hit. We'll get to that later. Douglas actually auditioned for a band that was called the Neon Boys, founded by Tom Verlaine and Richard Hell. Now, Douglas didn't know how to play guitar, so, he didn't get in. But Tom Verlaine and Richard Hell would go on to found the fundamental New York City punk band. But before we talk about them, let's talk about the epicenter of the New York City punk scene, CBGB. Located in the Bowery, which was one of the worst neighborhoods, and again, one of the worst cities in America, so it's pretty shit. CBGB was founded by Billy Crystal on December 10th, 1973. Hilly Crystal is actually an interesting figure. He used to be the booker for a very famous jazz club called the Village Vanguard. CBGB was actually founded on Hilly's previous bar, Hilly's on the Bowery, but it would go on to become one of the greatest music venues of all time. When I say greatest, I mean most prestigious, not in quality. There's still gum on those floors, I swear to God. Anyway, allegedly, the transformation from bar to music venue was, according to legend, done by television. Remember Tommy Verlaine and Richard Hell? That's their band. According to legend, Hilly Crystal was putting up the new marquee for the CBGB's building when he saw 3 guys in ripped t-shirts and jeans just staring at him. The next day, those 3 guys came into the bar and said they were from a band called Television, and they wanted to have CBGB's as a place to play. And Hilly was like, okay, what music do you play? And they were like, well, what does this sign mean, by the way? What's CBGB stand for? And he was like, oh yeah, country, bluegrass, and blues, all that good shit. And they were like, yeah, cool. What a coincidence. We played that music too. Please give us money. And Hilly was like, okay. On one condition. I'll give you 3 Sundays to perform, but you have to build the stage. And Television agreed, and they played their first show on March 31st, 1974. But that's just the legend. Multiple people have come forward to say that they actually played shows before Television did. Television weren't the first musical act at CBGB's. The actual idea to play music acts at the bar was from Hilly Crystal drinking some beers with some friends and them saying, yeah, you should get music in this place. And it was like, you know what? That sounds pretty good. Like most New York things happen. But if anyone wanted a symbolic legend about building the stage for New York City punk, I feel like Television, who are pretty pretentious, would probably enjoy that just a little bit. Now this was the definitive CBGB New York City punk scene. Which is funny, considering that the only punk band in this entire roster of bands, from Television to, who we'll later talk about, Blondie, the only punk band, definitively, was the Ramones, which makes them special, because that means they were the first definitive punk band in America. If you want to trace it back to the 50s and 60s with the Sonics or any of these other bands, the only time you really see punk is when Joey Ramone walks on stage. Now, that other band I was talking about, Blondie, they were sort of the middle way between television's elegance and long extended guitar solos and the dirty honesty of the Ramones. Actually, around this time, Tommy was working as an assistant engineer at the record plant in Manhattan, which was a recording studio. And he actually worked on a Jimi Hendrix album, a live album called Band of Word I Can't Say Anymore. Just look it up. Anyway, he felt at home in the studio, and he admired Jimi Hendrix's perfectionism and need to constantly improve. Now, this recording experience would go on to greatly benefit the Ramones once they actually started making their first album. Now, as Jeff, John, Tommy, and Douglas saw the music scene, it was just a bunch of weird guys with long overdrawn solos and crazy lyrics about dragons and fairies, and none of it was relatable to them. So they decided to make their own music that would relate to them. Now, all the members of the band that we talked about had met each other one way or another. And if you've noticed while I've been talking, this more sounds like a friend group turned music project, which kind of helped the chemistry of the Ramones foster. Now, it took a long time before they actually started doing rehearsals. And the main driving force with that was Tommy, because he never actually wanted to be a part of the band. He just wanted to manage, owing to his experience as an assistant engineer. And he saw real potential in at least John and Douglas. I guess Jeff was just over there with the drums, just patting away. The initial band was Jeff on drums, John on lead guitar, and Douglas on rhythm guitar and lead singer. And there was also on bass player a guy called Richie Stern who immediately bowed out as soon as he knew what he was getting into. There was a joke later on with the bandmates that he had a mental break and went to an institution. After Richie left, the lineup changed again when Douglas figured out that he couldn't really play the guitar and sing, and even if he could sing while playing the guitar, he'd blow his vocal cords out 2 songs in. So the lineup changed to John staying on lead guitar, Douglas going back to bass, and Jeff, after much encouragement from Tommy, which I think is very sweet, turned to drummer and lead singer. Now, Douglas was the first to change his name to a much cooler stage name, Dee Dee Ramone. Now, the last name was inspired by Paul McCartney, who during the height of Beatlemania would check into hotels as Paul Ramone. Soon, all the band was doing this, and he had Tommy Ramone, Johnny Ramone, Dee Dee Ramone, and Joey Ramone. The first show they played in this lineup was on March 30th, 1974, opening for The Fast at a place owned by a friend named Monty Melnick, who would later become their tour manager. Now, this show was a disaster. There was only 30 people there, which isn't the bad part. The bad part is you can't sing while you're drumming, Joey, and also you fell down the stairs halfway through. No one came to the second show.
Fair enough.
Very sad. Anyway, they had to find a new drummer, considering that Joey couldn't, play and sing. So while they were trying to find a new drummer, Tom would have to constantly show the new drummer how they were supposed to play the drums. And after a while, he just said, "Fuck it, I'll be the drummer." Why? I'll just do it. Fuck all this. So the classic lineup was born. Tommy on drums, John on lead guitar, Dee Dee on bass, and Joey as lead singer. Now, the Ramones played their first show at CBGB's on August 16th, 1974. And while this is really legendary and influential in hindsight, the show was absolutely fucking terrible. In the words of Hilly Crystal, they were the most untogether band I've ever seen. They kept starting and stopping. Dee Dee would go 1, 2, 3, 4, and they'd all start playing a different song. It was chaos. It was raw. But it had potential. The music was always rough and honest and ugly, but it was all highly calculated. So you had Joey and Dee Dee as the creative heads, Johnny as the constructor, the carpenter, building the music, and then you had Tommy with the overall plan. Everything from their live shows to their outfits to the way they sang and played was all highly thought out. They would even record their shows and play it back like football tape to see what they can improve. This is where they got the idea for Joey to just stand still and lean over the mic while playing. That's where Dee Dee got his pick to play bass, because you don't play a bass with pick. You just usually use your fingers. But no, apparently a pick looks cooler. And that's also where they got the ideas for purely white lights. No psychedelic color lighting. They also got their own PA to make sure everything went according to plan. Now, the shows would basically consist of Dee Dee walking up with Joey, Johnny, and Tommy. They all get up, no tuning or nothing, just sit down. Joey would introduce the band, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 from Dee Dee, and the band would explode into their music. Their shows would last around 12, 15 minutes at most. They were very short, and as soon as they were there, they were gone. All this calculation, it took them 6 months to rehearse and figure it out, which is incredibly impressive for a very new band. And like I said, the clothes were highly calculated. See, at the beginning, everyone was kind of going for their own look. Tommy and Joey kind of looked like what they always looked like. Johnny looked like a 70s rock star with the leopard print, open vest, whole shebang. And then you got Dee Dee with just a preppy rich boy look, which I kind of get, but I don't know, it's the Ramones, dude. Anyway, Tommy found out the idea to have their own uniformed costume. Black leather jackets, t-shirts with a cartoon character on them, ripped jeans and sneakers, and the bowl cuts. Now all this calculation, it looked incredible on stage. It was simple, and it was fast, and it was honest. But no one gave a shit. By 1975, no one really cared about the Ramones, probably because their live shows, while calculated, as I've said, would usually end in screaming matches once everyone started to fuck up. So after months and months of trying to get press for the band, Tommy finally got into contact with a guy called Danny Fields. Now, Danny Fields had already had experience in the music industry. He actually was I believe manager, or he was some part of the Ramones, not the Ramones, the Stooges story. But again, won't get into that. At this time, he's working at a teen girl magazine called 16. And his friend Liz was also a reporter there, and they saw this guy with the Ramones fly and were like, I don't want to see this guy. It's probably, who's Ramones? Is this a salsa band? Because there was a giant salsa scene going on at the time. Anyway, according to legend, Danny and Liz flipped a coin to see who would go see the band, and Liz lost. So she had to go see the band. And Liz came back to the office and was like, Danny, you have got to see these guys. These guys are incredible. Oh, are they really good? No, they're terrible, but they're incredible. You gotta come see this. So Danny walks into CBGB's one night and sees the Ramones. Now Danny saw one song in that CBGB shows that sold him on the band. I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement, which is a personal favorite song of mine. Danny went up to them that night and said, I want to be your manager. Oh my God, you guys are amazing. And Tommy basically went, oh, okay, will you write about us in your magazine? Danny was like, no, absolutely not. That's a teen girl magazine. Are you kidding me? Y'all aren't heartthrobs, okay? That's not gonna work, but I will manage you. And Johnny basically said, okay, you're gonna need to invest $500 in us and then we'll think about it. And so Danny got the money from his mom and he invested in the band and became their manager. Danny's saying of the band, it's like trying to remember what they sound like when they're not there. And when they play, it sounds all over again like a revelation. Now, while Danny was a great manager, he sometimes didn't make the best booking decisions. For instance, the Ramones' first out-of-town show was opening for Johnny Winter, a blues artist, a white blues artist, to a crowd of 2,000 in Connecticut. This isn't the Ramones crowd. This is a bunch of long hair, big beard, rocking out dude kind of guys. It's not what you want the Ramones for. Anyway, the Ramones get on stage, the lights are out, everyone's cheering. They're like, oh my God, this is gonna be a great show. And the lights come up and the crowd figure out that it's not Johnny Winter. And they all start booing and they all start throwing bottles and coins and whatever they can find at the band. band. And also, they didn't get paid because it was a audition for a record label that they lost. So that was a bit of a fuck up. Funny enough, this show would actually come 5 days before the CBGB's Top 40 Unsigned New York City Artists Festival, which is a 3-day festival held at CBGB's. And the Ramones were the talk of the town. July 16th, 1975 is considered the birth date of the New York punk scene, because that's when this festival started. And every article had pages on pages of, oh my God, these Ramones are incredible. But this didn't really get them attention from a lot of record labels. Sure, they got great reviews from the shows, but they still weren't getting their demos looked at. The record labels that they would send these demos to would look at the song for 10 seconds, immediately switch it off, and send it right back. They didn't give a fuck. And the Ramones were really discouraged. They didn't know what was wrong, because the music sounded incredible. But why the hell aren't you listening to us? It was horrible. Until one day. One day, a guy named Craig Leon, an AR man from Sire Records, got a demo in the mail. He played it, and it was the Ramones. Now, Craig Leon had already discovered the Talking Heads, another CBGB band, a year earlier. So he knew what the CBGB talent was, and he was hooked. He immediately sent it up to the head of Sire Records, a guy named Seymour. And Seymour was like, okay, this is interesting. And then his wife came in and was like, oh my God, I love these guys. You gotta sign them. And so Seymour was like, okay, well, we'll see what we can do. So Seymour offered a contract to the Ramones for a singles deal. And they said, no, we want an album. We want an album. And they're like, I don't know. And Johnny went, are you confident in us? Are you? Good. Give us an album. And so they signed their album deal on January 1976 to Sire Records. A month later, they would have their first single. The band began recording their debut album at Plaza Sounds right above Radio City Music Hall on February 2nd, 1976. And February 5th, 1976, they finished the album because they did the album in 3 days. When Seymour came into the record studio to check it out and see how they were going, Johnny just sat back and said, it's not going too good. We only got 7 tracks done. This was a few hours after they were in the studio. A few hours. Most albums at that time took a year to make. Pink Floyd's took a year to make. But no. They trusted the A&R guys. They were like, is it good? All right, it's good. Next song. They just wasted no time. Now, most of the production on this album is fantastic, and that can be attributed to Craig Leon, who is now the house producer for Sire Records, and Tommy, who was also overseeing production. And their production makes this album sound beautiful. It's the good stuff. It's clean, but still rough and loud and honest. It keeps the Ramones spirit without sounding like a demo reel, which, some punk albums are wont to do. But, that's another story. The first single to come from this album was 1976's Blitzkrieg Bop. And I will bet you large sums of money that you've heard this song before, because this is probably the most popular punk song there is, was, and will be. It's huge.
Let's go! I don't
This song was called Animal Hop originally. It was a song written by Tommy about a couple guys going to the club and dancing the animal hop. Fun times. And so Dee Dee took the lyrics and added the Nazism, Blitzkrieg Bop, and the implied violence. Instead of they're shouting in the back now, it's shoot them in the back now. You know, because you need that punk edge. Now, the hey, ho, let's go chant was inspired by the Bay City Rollers with their song Saturday, which also had a very similar chant. And the Ramones really wanted a rallying cry song, something that they could play and everyone could sing along to, which I think they succeeded on that point, I'll be honest. Now, let's talk about the Nazism, because it's pretty prevalent in this album, and it kind of needs to be touched on. Now, this doesn't come from a place of wanting to be Nazis, because Joey and Tommy were both Jewish. Tommy's parents escaped the Holocaust. The reason they put it in there was because, one, Dee Dee had a certain fascination from his childhood, and two, it was from the disdain of constantly having to hear about the Holocaust and just having it overloaded into their lives. It's basically a fuck you to parents. You took the worst thing possible, Nazis, and they put them on stage and just made the adults sneer a bit, which is sort of the intended effect. The rest of the album is just as revolutionary, with the whole album sounding raw but professional. Songs like Judy is a Punk, written by Joey, about a juvenile delinquent dying in Berlin and San Francisco, were recorded hard and fast, and the song's only 1 minute and 32 seconds long. Yet the longest song of the album, I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement, with its stunning minimalist guitar, inspired by horror movies. In fact, other songs like Chainsaw were inspired by Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was Johnny's favorite horror movie. Then we have songs like I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, written by Tommy, which are very tender and sweet. These showcase Joey's ability to convey a sense of longing that only really Joey could convey.
Hey little girl, I wanna be your boyfriend. Sweet little girl, I wanna be your boyfriend.
Another highlight is the 1962 pop hit Let's Dance. And while the cover is much more abrasive than the original, with the organ still being there in the background, but with a more ripping guitar this time, it's still a very fun song. The album cover was also iconic, with the Ramones sitting up against a wall, leaning back, basically trying to look like tough gang members. It was originally photographed by Roberta Bailey for Punk Magazine, which is a magazine covering the New York City punk scene at the time. Now, Roberta Bailey said that it was really hard for the Ramones to stay still because they just kind of didn't see the point and kind of just wanted to leave, which is a little funny. What's also funny is that on the album cover, you can actually see Johnny flipping off the camera, and it's really sad that no one noticed at the time. The album sadly didn't sell well, with only 7,000 copies being sold, but it was highly influential, specifically to the punk scene. The costume that they had created, the ripped jeans and leather jacket, had basically become a standard for punks everywhere in America. As they toured around the US, they began to spread punk music throughout, popping up little scenes in like a small town in Oklahoma or California. And while they didn't last long, some of them were just as incredible as New York City. But the Ramones did one other thing, and this more generally for punk everywhere, or rock everywhere. They showed that you could perform music affordably and extremely well. And that's what punk in general showed America, is that you could do it yourself without having a big label or producer. You could make amazing music. And this influence will lead to some of the greatest musical acts of all time. But those are stories for another day. For now, thank you all for watching, and long live punk rock.